According to dictionary.com, police is the regulation and control of a community, especially for the maintenance of public order, safety, health, morals, etc. Unfortunately, the police in Ferguson, Missouri have done none of these actions and have taken the role of soldiers instead. You may be asking yourself, why should we care about what the police is doing thousands of miles away? It's not just affecting Ferguson, but it's affecting the entire country as well. Weapons that were used to wreak havoc in Iraq and Afghanistan have now found their way on our home soil. As a result, it's affecting many innocent people and children, especially communities of color. If a police officer is armed and trained like a soldier, then it's only obvious that he will act like one. According to an article by Haquin Chen on August 19, 2014, SWAT teams are conducting over 80,000 raids a year, compared to a low 3,000 during the 1980s. Even though the amount of crime has dropped in the recent years, police forces are still spending well over $6 billion a year on military, assault rifles, night vision goggles, and armored vehicles. The militarization of our police is an unnecessary waste of public funding and use of force on our country and its citizens that should not be tolerated. Hopefully by the end of this speech, you'll have a better understanding of the impact that the militarization of our police forces has and take on a different view of those who are supposed to protect and serve. With that being said, let's start off and explain what in fact is police militarization. The militarization of our police is the transfer and arming of excess military equipment to police forces. Police forces are using military weapons and equipment that are meant to be used in war zones against enemy combatants, not in residential areas on innocent and unarmed civilians. Equipment such as mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles that are usually used by the military and that are being used by police forces in unnecessary situations such as a raid on a local bar that was suspected for serving underage drinkers. One problem that this causes is the unfair treatment and unnecessary use of military tactics and weapons on innocent civilians. The media clearly portrayed this during the Ferguson unrest earlier this year. Police officers are not soldiers. Therefore, the use of such equipment and weapons in an environment other than a war zone can lead to many people getting hurt. As stated by an article on BusinessInsider.com in 2014, and I quote, "Officers can get jumpy and shoot unnecessarily or accidentally." Another problem that this causes is the immense amount of money that is being spent in arming our police forces with such equipment. And this is a graph of all the states, of how many states own a mine-resistant vehicle, which is these vehicles right here, which is you usually see them being used by the military in Afghanistan or in Iraq. Equipment and weapons like military assault rifles, armored vehicles, night vision goggles, and thousands of rounds of ammunition doesn't come cheap. As stated by Deirdre Shees Green on September 10, 2014 on USA Today, and I quote, "The federal government is sending over $1 billion a year to police departments across the country in the form of equipment and grants." Most people, including Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri, on MissouriNet.com, would agree that, and I quote, "The militarization of our police becomes a waste of taxpayers' money when the equipment isn't properly utilized like it was at Ferguson, which worsened the situation." Now that I've explained what police militarization is and its negative effects it causes, let's go over some of the causes that led to it. The causes of the militarization of our police forces are due to the need of better equipment to fight the growing threat of terrorism and local crime in our streets. During the 1980s and the 1990s, the amount of violence and criminal gang activity began to grow rapidly in the U.S. Police forces needed more firepower to fight criminal activity. As stated by Matt Puzo in 2014 in an article in the New York Times, and I quote, "Congress created the military transfer program in the 1990s Congress created the military transfer program in the 1990s when violent crime plagued America's cities and the police felt outgunned by drug gangs. Police forces needed more firepower to help fight the so-called war on drugs, which President Nixon called it at the time, which gave Congress the right to supply police forces with military aid in an attempt to battle what was called at the time a threat to our national security. This mainly targeted African Americans in poor poverty-struck neighborhoods, which will later lead to a long history of tension and hate between the two. Another growing concern that caused the militarization of our police forces came after the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001. As the growing threat of our national security began to shift from drugs to terrorism, police forces once again felt the need to increase their firepower to protect our nation from this new enemy. However, that was not necessarily the case, as stated by Kara Dansky in 2014 on crimereport.com, and I quote, "Terrorism became the new reason to arm American cops as if they were soldiers, but drug offenders would still be their primary target." Now that I've talked about the causes of police militarization, let's go over some solutions that can prevent it. There are two solutions that can be used to discourage the militarization of our police forces. One step that can be taken to stop the militarization of our police is for people to participate and sign the many petitions that are available to suspend the weapons transfer program that is militarizing our police. Already this has begun to take momentum in Congress in response to the disturbances that occurred in Ferguson. As stated by Evan Perez on September 19, 2014 on CNN.com, and I quote, "Senator Tom Coburn is sponsoring the legislation which will block state and local police from receiving broad categories of military aid equipment, including M16 rifles, mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, and camouflage equipment. As a result, many local police departments have begun to return many of their weapons and military vehicles to the Defense Department." Another step that can be taken is to better train our police forces in certain situations to prevent another event like at Ferguson. It's obvious that our police forces aren't properly trained and suited to handle certain situations effectively without resorting to violence. According to an article on popularmechanics.com in 2014, officers who dress like soldiers with military weapons and gear are more likely to think that they're at war. These military weapons and equipment are meant to be used on the battlefield, not in our city streets. Police forces should change their way of training their officers without such gear and weapons to better handle certain situations without resorting to violence. Well, with that being said, police officers are completely different from soldiers. One protects us by killing enemies outside of our nation that mean to hurt us, while the other protects us from criminals and helps maintain order inside of our nation. The militarization of our police is simply an expensive burden and unneeded in an environment where we look at our police to feel safe, not frightened of. Today I talked about what police militarization is, the effects it has, the causes that led to it, and what solutions can be taken to stop it. With that being said, I hope you take a different point of view on the people who protect our streets and take home the fact of how much of an impact it has had in the recent months in Ferguson, so hopefully it won't repeat itself. Thank you.